I am Joe.
And I am Dave.
Hello! It's Friday. We don't usually do a stream on Friday, but it's Friday the 13th in 2020, and what the hell could go wrong with that?
Exactly. So when the world ends, it'll be our fault.
Isn't it anyway?
Usually.
It's all the atheists' fault. You know, we're to blame for all moral issues, aren't we?
I know I am.
Actually, usually I don't buy into the whole Friday the 13th thing. I always used to say, "Oh no, it's my lucky day" and all that. But today I was lying down on my back. I was doing a little bit of core work, and my back went ping. I was just like, really, really.
Did you pull your back masturbating?
No, that would be a much better story. But I also today decided I'd had enough of trying to grow my hair out, and I've cut it to a slightly more sensible thing. So I was trying to do the whole lockdown hair and have a big old thing that I was gonna tie back and go all Viking. But I just gave up on that idea.
It's a pain in the ass, long hair.
It is, but I figured I wanted to do it once in my life, and but no.
Before you get to my age and can't actually grow any more hair than this.
Exactly. So tonight we are planning on doing a sort of like a answering 10 questions for atheists by Trinity Radio. Now this guy, I've actually watched a couple of his videos before, or seen videos that he's been included on, and I actually quite like him. I like the way he presents himself and conducts himself, and it's not the normal theistic blather that you see, in the same way that we like atheists who try and take a different angle. I like to see theists who aren't just saying the same stuff over and over again. So we figured we'd do a little review of answer the questions in his video. We've actually done other questions for atheists. You and I did what was it, 21 questions for atheists or something like that on our
like that.
Yeah. They weren't as good questions.
No, these ones are quite honest, and they're not filled with those same kind of, oh, I gotcha, you have to admit God exists kind of questions.
No, it was quite encouraging. I mean, I've only given it a quick watch myself. I haven't had a chance to prepare anything, but I figured it would be something good to watch. So we're even less prepared than usual.
Which is saying something.
It really is. So I hope you got your drinks. Also, any questions that want to come in, I mean, please do. It's Friday night. We are looking to have a laugh, but we're going to get on with this video. I suppose I should share the old screen. That's the one. Let me know when you can see it, Dave.
Okay, it's there.
Excellent. So I'll switch the old that way. And we'll stop the video between each section, essentially. And here we go.
We need a flashy logo.
Discussions space can be so combative. And when atheists and Christians come up with lists of questions that they don't think the other side can answer, those questions usually aren't genuine. I've never made a list like that, although I've responded to some. Here, I hope my atheist interlocutors will consider these questions deeply without giving glib answers. These aren't meant to be gotcha questions, though I'm not asking for no reason. I expect you will have answers, and I want to hear what the most sincere among you have to say. With that, here are my 10 questions for atheists. What facts about reality that you and I agree are real facts about the way the world is does your worldview account for, but my Christianity doesn't account for, or at least doesn't account for well? And for those of you that would point out atheism isn't a worldview, I'm talking about your worldview that includes atheism. I can't think of any. Christianity accounts for evil, suffering, the existence of other religions, including supernatural events in those other religions, science, and differences among different denominations of Christianity. But I can think of many things that the most common worldviews that include atheism don't answer as well as I think Christianity does. Like universal supernatural claims, universal religious experiences, free will, morality, near-death experiences, beauty, the rapid expansion of the early church, the events surrounding the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth, and our shared longing for purpose and meaning. So what is it that Christianity doesn't answer as well as your worldview?
So I think with that one, my initial thought is, obviously when we're thinking about atheism, we're thinking about the overall thing. So he's not necessarily saying what does atheism answer, is he really, Dave?
No, it's more about how an atheistic worldview, a worldview without God and without the supernatural, basically a metaphysical naturalist sort of world, how would they answer those sort of questions?
So, I mean, if we take that and we have a think about it, I think you can justify a lot of things in a number of different ways. So if you think about even to the origins of the universe, is the universe eternal? Is God eternal? And all of those sort of things. It depends on how you're attacking it. There are some unknowns that you can give a rational answer to on either side of the coin. But what do you think that there are some things that you can have a stronger naturalistic view than you can from a theistic point of view?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't particularly think that there's anything in the atheistic worldview in the sense that he's speaking of it. They can explain things that Christianity can't give an explanation for. But it's like you said, you can kind of give an explanation for anything using any worldview. The question is whether it's an accurate description, an accurate accounting of the facts. So it's
There's
with
one
me.
thing sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, with me, there's actual faults within Christianity itself and within the concept of God that make me think that it doesn't explain the world as well as naturalism.
Yeah, so I mean, we go in there with some of the implausibility of the omni claim, or there are various contradictions on it, inaccuracies within the Bible and things like that. There is, I mean, he talks there about the did he say the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no real evidence for the resurrection. There is evidence supporting that the man, not the biblical Jesus, but the person that he was based on, did exist, and the stories could be an amalgamation of various different characters and myths from the past. But there isn't enough outside of the Bible to support the biblical Jesus, for example. There is enough, I would say, for us to consider that there was a man that existed in that time. And there's a few other things like that. We've actually had a comment from Tom. How you doing? Yes, the idea of God being a super all-knowing being is my biggest trouble. God is a very lazy way of describing how this reality comes together. Now, I would actually agree that this is a number of different things, like the all-knowing, the omniscient claim. There are a number of things that contradict that within the Bible, where God suddenly seems surprised, or God suddenly has to wipe everyone out because he's disappointed in their behavior and things like that. And it's like, well, you created them knowing everything that they were going to do, so you knew you were going to have to do that if you created them this way. Now, if we talk about other things like with the I think the whole omni-god part does, at least how many present the omni-god, is a bit self-defeating. Now, you could argue that it's not necessarily all-powerful. For example, you could say it's the most power that you could potentially have in the universe. You could say that all-knowing isn't necessarily knowing everything that's going to happen. You can excuse it, and everything can be excused one way or another. And you could do the same with a naturalistic claim as well. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, how can I put it? It's basically, even if we give the idea that Christianity can explain all these things, it just doesn't explain them as well, or it doesn't convince me as well as naturalism does anyway.
Indeed. So we've had another couple of comments in. Josh has said it would be great if we all cared about knowing as many true things as possible, and we also care about believing as many few. I think he means as few false things as possible as well, and that's right. Adam, hey Opie, how you doing? He says it's his favorite time.
Hey, Opie.
And Tom brings up the divine plan there as well, and that's another one that offers problems, because if there is this divine plan, then is there free will? I mean, is that compatible with each other? And it's the same sort of thing that you might find with prayer as well. I mean, if there is a divine plan and God is following this plan, is praying to God actually going to make any difference to his plan? I think Chris,
wouldn't it be part of the plan
that you pray for it? Yeah, it could be. It could be part of the plan. Again, all of these things can be excused one way or the other. I don't think any of them are convincing enough explanations one way or the other, though.
I agree. And when he brings up something like suffering can be accounted for in Christianity, it can be accounted for in naturalism as well, of course, because we just suffer. It is part of who we are. It is part of nature that things suffer.
Yeah.
It seems less. I know it's kind of a sloppy thing, but in the view of something like Christianity, suffering seems to be something that goes against a perfect being.
Yes, but again, that could be excused by, well, that's just your understanding of what perfection is, and blah-de-blah.
Yeah, of course. And also, perhaps part of the plan is suffering so that we can learn to be better people. Perhaps he's bringing about a better kind of event through suffering, that kind of thing. There's always answers to these things in most religions.
Yeah, so I think we can say for that first question, there are equal, potentially, number of things that can be explained better or worse one way or the other, depending on how you're willing to look at it. And I would think that there is a slight bias from his question there, because he's already accepted certain things as definitely being true, for example, like the resurrection of Jesus. So how can you explain that through naturalism? Well,
it's easy. Yeah, it didn't happen. Yeah. The tales that are written aren't specifically historically accurate narratives. They're about something else.
Exactly. So I think we've covered that one. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
If your definition of atheism is merely that it's a lack of belief in God and you're just waiting to be convinced, but then you speak of him as though he's in some way synonymous with Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, or fairies, doesn't that at least send the message to your listeners that you actually believe that there is no God? After all, these are entities and beings that you likely believe do not exist. And if your response is that you merely lack a belief in Santa Claus and don't actively believe that he does not exist, doesn't that sound a little disingenuous, honestly?
So, I mean, this is
something. It's not really aimed But I do agree with him here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the both of us dislike the atheism as a lack of belief in God's definition. We understand that it is a valid definition, as that's how language works and it's how it's used. I've quite often come up against people who will say gods are imaginary, and then they'll say, well, I don't believe that they're not real, I just lack belief in them. I'm like, well, you've just asserted that they're imaginary. So if they are imaginary, that means they have no objective reality, which means
Yeah.
there are a lot of problems with that lack belief definition of atheism. And I do find that generally the lack of belief definition of atheism is people thinking it absolves them of any burden of proof. It is lazy. And there are some that argue for it for ideological reasons, because they want to increase their numbers so that they have more voting power. They want to keep creationism out of schools. Well, look how many atheists we have. But if they focused on non-theists, probably have the same result. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've also had atheists tell me that I lack belief in Santa Claus. It's like, well, no, actually, I believe Santa Claus doesn't exist. I believe he's not real.
Yeah, I mean, you also lack belief in him because you believe he doesn't exist. But you know, this is one of those things. It's created as a fiction. I think by the time you're, I don't know what age, but let's just say by the time you're a teenager, pretty much everybody knows that Santa Claus is a mythological character. It doesn't actually exist. There is someone that pretends to be him in the North Pole. There's people that pretend to be him around various malls, but the actual character is not real. So yeah. So we've had a couple of comments comes in. Josh says the telephone game and allegory. Don't know what that's relating to.
It's in relation to the resurrection, I'm guessing.
Okay, yes, fair. That makes sense. And Tom, he says it's not really a lack of belief in God. His concept of God is just different. Well, I mean, in that case, if you've got a concept of God that you believe in, then technically you're a theist. You know. However, if you're saying that there isn't really a God, it depends on how you're using the term. If you're saying that God isn't really a God, you're equating God with, say, the universe, then that's sort of pantheism. I mean, there's so many different ways you can slice that, but what we're talking about here is there are many that define atheism merely as a lack of belief in God or gods. So that puts anything that, not just anyone, but anything that is not a theist as some form of atheist. Now we've done we've had a number of conversations about how there's various ontological positions. So you could have someone that is classically an agnostic, so they're someone that don't believe God exists, but they also don't believe God does not exist. They're unsure, basically, and they sit in that middle ground. There are many that would argue that they are a form of atheists. There are people that think the whole God concept is so completely incoherent that considering the proposition God exists is meaningless. So for these people, they would be agnostic. Again, there would be people go, well, they lack belief, so therefore they're an atheist. And there are a lot of problems defining things by purely what they lack. We've got a few articles on the site, so I'm happy to send links out to anyone, or just go to answersinreason.com and have a look at ontology and the things we lack, and the definitional problems with lack theism, or definitional problems with lack of belief, should I say. We've also got a video coming out on various ontological positions, as well as a podcast, part of the Fresh Air series. So all of this stuff will be covered in the future. And as Josh says, if you don't know how we feel about lack theism, you haven't been listening the last 2 months. I respect people's identity. If they want to be called an atheist, even though they would normatively be described as an agnostic. That's fine. I'm happy to call them an atheist. What I don't like is when they go and assert that their definition should apply to other people, because for one, it's a colloquial definition rather than a normative one, and for two, it's an identity thing. And could you imagine if they were doing something like that with someone's gender?
Also, hello, Martin.
Oh, is Martin on as well? Oh, is he joining us? Oh, he's muted his thing. You can join us, Martin.
Yeah, here I am.
Hello, mate.
Are you a loser with nothing to do on a Friday night too?
I'm a loser with a video game to play all night. So probably going to be a bit in and out, but sort of here. So
Cool. Call of Duty?
No, man. It's worse than
Guild
that.
Wars.
Fallout? Oh, Guild Wars.
Yep.
All right. If there's no more questions or comments on that question, then I think we'll move on to the next.
Yeah, sounds good.
When atheism becomes a part of someone's worldview, they typically change their positions on other issues like abortion, sexual morality, and a number of other things. I actually have several videos of well-known atheists saying that there's nothing wrong with prostitution, that they hope their children don't save themselves until marriage, and that sex workers should be put up on a pedestal no different than the military. I didn't use those here because I didn't want to seem combative to individuals, specifically the individuals who made those statements. But even if you didn't become an atheist just so you could sin, and I believe you, do you at least understand why those moves could send that message to people who might say that to you?
I mean, here, I definitely understand where he's coming from with that. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think there are, generally, for me, it's, you look at it and you go, there's a lot of immoral stuff going on in the Bible, or stuff that's claimed to be immoral, but no real reasoning behind why it is. And actually, these things are amoral, or lesser of two evils, or something like that. And you know, part of that reasoning as you go through it, you know, like the mass genocide of people, and things like that, you go, I mean, how is this a standard of morality? So we continue from there, and you go, okay, so it's not necessarily becoming an atheist changes your worldview, changes your view on morality. It's Christianity can be incompatible for what you view morality as, and then you start thinking, oh, hang on, well, if this bit's wrong, well, what about that bit? Well, what about that? I don't agree with this. There are certain bits in there that, you know, the abortion one's always tricky. I'm definitely one of those people that is pro-choice, but I don't think it's a nice choice, and I wish no one ever had to make it. I don't think we can necessarily say it's a moral behavior. It's one of those things that I could think is potentially a lesser of two evils behavior, and I'm probably going to be hated for saying that, but that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I didn't become an atheist from being a Christian, so I don't really know, but I don't think it's necessarily the case that people just want to sin, or that it should be looked at as just people wanting to sin. I think there's a sort of self-fulfilling thing going on there. The people already believe that they leave the church just so that they can sin, so therefore they pin that behavior on it. I suppose that you could look at it in a sense of breaking tradition, breaking free from what they see as outdated traditions or traditions that are overly oppressive, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's. I think that's the thing. There are so many people out there that think they've left their church or religion because of these sorts of reasons, and I don't think it's particularly helpful to view things that way. It's like the people who go, you were never truly a Christian if you became an atheist. You know, and apart from it being a no true Scotsman fallacy, you're not even taking the time to listen to why they left their faith, and therefore you're just assuming instantly that they we're never a true Christian, and I'm not going to listen to you. You're clearly a sinner. You wanted to sin from the start. No true Christian would want to sin. And actually, you're not taking the time to think about, well, other than because this book says it's a sin, and I believe that this book comes from some divine purpose, why does this seem to be a sin? Like, what is actually wrong with this? And I think that there are a number of people who will take the time to consider these things. For example, like homosexuality, there is nothing wrong with it as far as I can tell. You could argue that in a state where we were struggling for survival, that it might have been less encouraged because we needed some more pairings to go forth and multiply. But then you can see that as actually, you look at most people, their religion comes from their parents, and they carry on that sort of thing. So this rule was probably put in there so that they could create more and more Christians, rather than it having anything to do with it actually being some form of sin.
Yeah, I mean, I could throw in some here. According to most Christians in the Christian church, it's one man, one woman. That's a marriage. Anything else is immoral. Now, if you take into account Islam, according to their religion, one man can have up to 4 wives, 3 or 4 wives. I'm pretty sure it's 4. And you marry from war widows, that kind of thing, so that these women aren't made homeless when they lose their partner in war or what have you. They have a foundation to go back on. They have a safe house, that kind of thing. So you can see how, like you were describing, certain morals were created for the religion to help out in a particular social situation. So, saying that Islam is immoral because it allows the 4 wives, I suppose it depends on how they're treated, really. But it goes against the Christian value. So which one is actually the most immoral? Saying that they can only have 1 wife, or the one that allows for marriages of war widows?
And both religions would argue against each other in that case.
Yep, and both religions also claim to be from the same God. They're both supposed to be revelations of the Abrahamic God.
Yeah. And also, I mean, going back onto the abortion thing, there is that potion that is given. Was it Old Testament, where if you think your wife has been unfaithful and she has the potion, it makes them miscarry.
Yeah.
I mean, you say abortion's wrong, yet there's the potion that makes them miscarry. And not only that, we go back to the whole genocide sort of thing. And so we've got a few more comments in. No, carry on, Dave. You go for it. I'm just going to read these and then I'll read them out loud.
Okay. The other thing I was going to say is the other things that he spoke about were sort of sexual immorality type things, like wanting to have sex outside of marriage, that kind of thing. But he also threw abortion in there, which feels out of place. People aren't leaving Christianity to go out and have a ton of abortions.
No.
And to say that Christians don't have abortions, I feel like would be taking it a step too far.
No, indeed. And actually, you see a lot of it where they can't have a legal abortion because it's become illegal somewhere. They go and have a coat hanger abortion because they don't want that. I mean, there's that joke where, Mary was that, oops, I can't have an abortion. What should I do? I was divinely impregnated.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's a bit glib, bit of a joke. Perhaps shouldn't throw it in there, but I did because I find it kind of amusing because that could actually be the influence of that story.
Well, if you're going to be stoned to death for adultery.
Yeah. You either get stoned to death or you say that you've been impregnated by God. I know what I'd choose. So Opie says that one can be an atheist and not an anti-theist. Someone who thinks religion provides prosocial institution, and that's a fair enough comment. I genuinely see that there is benefit from religion.
I think religion makes some people's lives a whole lot better. So
definitely, and I think there are some churches and things like that that generally do some really good charity work and things like that. I mean, even Chris, his wife used to spend a lot of time doing charity work with the church because there wasn't another organization that did that, and she wanted to help out in her community, and the way she could do that was by helping the church. She didn't believe, but they were okay with people helping out, and I think that's a great thing to do. There is definitely a lot of benefit provided by religion and religious institutions. I personally wish we'd take it upon ourselves to do it without any sort of promise of eternal reward or anything like that, but you know. Tom says that thou shalt not kill is a commandment that has been ignored by religion since the beginning. It's been ignored by people. And there have also been times where it's that particular one is actually supposed to be thou shalt not murder. So it's supposed to be an unlawful killing. And technically, any killing commanded by God is therefore lawful. So there are excuses for it, is all I'm saying here. There are people who can find a way to justify certain killings. You go for the jihads and everything like that. Technically, you could say that from their perspective, I'm not justifying it. I'm saying from their perspective, it's justified. Josh says, when you remove your moral foundations, you have to replace it, and those new behaviors become a form of reason, not a prescriptive book. So, yeah, you're right there. I think people who've spent some time looking into morality probably realize that the purpose of it is things like flourishing and well-being. There may be different approaches to how they might find humans flourish best and protect the well-being, but ultimately there are certain things that you realize that don't really damage that, so why are they considered immoral? Tom also says homosexuals are guaranteed not to have abortions. So again, I don't really see his point. You think they're the allies?
Yep.
Yeah, well said, Tom. To be fair, I mean, the actual line is a man shall not lie with another man as he would lie with a woman. Or mankind.
It's the bro code.
Sorry?
It's the bro code.
Yeah. So technically there's nothing against lesbianism. I mean, it depends how you want to interpret it, and that's another problem I find with a lot of religious texts and various translations and all those sorts of things. Everyone says that their interpretation, their translation is the right one. It's the closest to the original. I've heard people say that the King James version is the most accurate and most original, whereas others will go, well, no, that one's been completely foobarred by King James. You know, and there's, you know, Henry VIII made changes to the Bible and all sorts. So it's really hard to actually find anything that's close to the original text. It's, even if this thing was originally inspired by a deity, I don't think any of the iterations we see are particularly close to what the original was. So, yeah, Josh says, yeah, don't have vaginal sex with a man. Yeah, you're right.
Yep.
And 69ing is okay. 69ing is encouraged.
If you do it standing up, is that the same as lying with them?
No, exactly.
See, you got to think smart.
Right, right, should we get to the
Highbrow
next one?
philosophy.
Yeah. How to have moral sex with a man.
If it's a lack of belief sort of atheism, what is it? Is it 50-50, 60-40, 75-25? And at what point do you feel disingenuous saying that you merely lack a belief, as opposed to leaning towards, I believe that God does not exist?
Yeah. So, I mean, that one, I get his point. Basically, that again, if we go back with someone who says it's only a lack of belief, it doesn't mean they believe they don't. They believe God does not exist. So they lack belief both ways. That's like we were having in our conversation about new atheism with Ozzy the other week, and he's talking about how it basically that means that they're unsure. They're basically normatively described as an agnostic. So they're not necessarily leaning one way or other. They might be, but they're still not sure. They're not convinced, right? So that's what they're saying. So they've got no real conviction either way. I think the second that you do have conviction one way or the other, that is when you're saying that you're holding a belief one way or another. There isn't really much more I feel that I can add to that. Is there anything you would, Dave?
I think the thing here with something like this is that you have to remember that a lot of theists, they're not answering the question, is it true God exists? What they're doing is they're describing a mental state. They think theism describes a mental state, and they think atheism is describing a mental state rather than a position on the question of whether God exists or not. So even if it leans 90% towards believing God does not exist, they still describe atheism from within that mental state position.
So for anyone who hasn't seen any of our videos before, I figure I'll just go through this one briefly. Theism is usually described as the belief God exists, or something like a God exists. At least one God exists. Fill it in how you like, but it's described as that. However, theism is the concept, so it's not an active belief state. What we're talking about there is the propositional content of the belief, namely God exists. So we could say theism is the proposition God exists. It's also all the arguments and evidence for said God. So when we think about it in those terms, atheism is normatively described as the proposition that God does not exist. So a theist believes the proposition of theism, and an atheist believes the proposition of atheism. And then you've got that middle ground, known as the psychological state of being agnostic. But with the lack of belief definition, as Dave rightly says, that people aren't answering is it true God exists, or answering the proposition God exists. They're answering the question, do you believe God exists?
Yeah.
And that becomes a binary answer of yes, no. And that no, anything that's no, is then regarded as an atheist. And
well, that's one of Aaron Raw's argument, isn't it? It's that atheism and theism aren't about the question of whether God exists. It's about whether somebody believes God exists or does not believe God exists.
Indeed, and he'll go so far as to say it's not actually important. It's only important on what people believe. But I was like,
yeah,
well, really? I mean, why would you spend so much time arguing against this if you are unsure? If you don't know whether a God does not exist or not, if you only lack a belief in gods, and also lack a belief in gods not existing, why would you spend so much time arguing and telling theists they're stupid for their belief, when actually you're unsure what you believe in yourself? And they could be right because you're unsure. Or are you sure, but you're hiding behind this lack of belief because you don't want to have to support why you believe?
Well, I would say for the theist, it's important, the question of whether God exists or not, because they're putting their faith in this existence. They're believing that God exists. So therefore it is important to them whether or not God exists. If they believe he exists but don't actually care, wouldn't that be something of a contradiction?
I'd say so, yes, definitely. Josh comes in and goes, is lacktheism descriptive and non-theism normative? Yeah, basically. I mean, if there is the normative definition of theism and atheism and agnosticism, and so anything that is not a theist would be, a non-theist normatively, and descriptively, a non-theist can be described as an atheist. That's simply that.
Yeah, non-theism is also descriptive, but it's descriptive of all the things that aren't theist.
Yeah.
It's just that most lack-theists label everything that's not theist as atheist. What the lack of belief thing is descriptive of is a mental state.
Yeah, exactly. And as we've gone over a number of times, the other problem with just speaking of things in terms of what they lack is if everything that is not a theist is an atheist, you end up with people making stupid claims like rocks are atheists. And I'd rather not go down that path again. I think most people out there realize how stupid that argument is.
Most people that hold to the lack of belief definition don't argue that rocks are atheist. Even they find it a dumb argument.
They do, because they realize that the whole point of the atheist is they're speaking of a person that lacks belief in gods. They're at least acknowledging that there is a cognitive process going on there. And that's the thing. When you're speaking about beliefs, even something that lacks belief, you are speaking in terms of mental states. And if you have no cognitive state or no ability to hold it, then really you're not having that same sort of conversation. Let's get on with the next one, shall we?
Yeah.
Now, I know we've all got our talking points, but I want you to struggle to be as sincere with yourself as you can right now. Doesn't it bother you a little bit that when we come to talk about the origins of the universe, and if there's a multiverse, the origin of that too, that the only real options you've got besides God is a past infinite universe, which is impossible, or the universe coming to exist uncaused out of nothing, or something far less clear than even those? It seems that for any worldview that includes atheism, there's a massive blind spot when it comes to the origin of the universe. And all the attempts to try and circumvent that problem seem desperate and at least far less likely than theism. My question isn't just what do you typically say about this, because I'm well aware of the responses. My question is simply this: when you step away from the debate mode that it's so easy for us all to get into online, doesn't this issue destabilize you a little bit? It seems to fit really poorly with any worldview that includes atheism.
So, if the universe can be eternal, if God can be eternal, why can't the universe? That's my first question there. He's gone on about the universe being like an infinite universe. He says that's impossible. Well, why is an infinite God not impossible then?
Yeah, see, this is one of the problems I have with this kind of argument that God solves it, because for me it doesn't. God still suffers from a similar infinite regress, just in a slightly different way. I know that they make the argument that God exists out of time and therefore doesn't suffer from this infinite regress because God isn't bound by time. But to me, it's kind of nonsensical.
I mean, personally, I don't think that there ever was a true nothing. I think that
Neither
there
do
has
I.
always been something. Now, I think that was dense energy in the universe, but that could have been a god. Could have been. But if there ever was a true nothing, there would be no laws of physics there, because there would be absolutely nothing there. So therefore, technically, anything could happen.
Well, no, nothing could happen. If there's absolutely nothing, nothing can happen. That's the argument.
Well, we don't know that for a fact. I agree with you, but it's just one of those things where if there actually is a state where there is nothing, there aren't the normal laws of physics. Now, this is not what I necessarily believe to be the case. As I said, I think the universe has always existed in some form or another. I think that energy was at a dense state at the start of it. I don't know if it was in a state before that. I don't think anybody knows. We can only tell, was it a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of a second after the Big Bang started. We don't know. There's more and more evidence coming out that there could be a multiverse and all of that. I really don't know, but I don't think that you can say, well, there can be an infinite God, but there can't be an infinite universe. I think that's almost a form of special pleading. If there can be an infinite something, then why can't it be an infinite something else?
Yeah. Like I say, it's the same for me. I don't know the origins of the universe. Yes, the infinite possibilities does sound a bit hard for me to accept. I know that there are physicists that accept that and argue for it. To me, it doesn't make logical sense. The same goes with God, though. Like I say, arguing that God exists out of time doesn't solve the problem for me. It just to it. Universe, we see what could be labeled as time, and the argument that the universe popped in from absolutely nothing. If they're going to argue that there was absolutely nothing before the universe except God, well, that would mean that God existed in absolute nothingness. So there was no spatial area anywhere. So it is kind of meaningless to say God existed in nothing, because there is no in for nothing.
That's a very fair point.
And I know that they say he's immaterial, so therefore he doesn't need space. Well, I'll say if he's immaterial, he doesn't take up space, but it still needs space. You can't exist in absolute nothingness, immaterial or not.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so much that we could go into there. You could even go, well, why would he bother to create anything, and all of those questions. And I don't think we need to go down that path, because we could probably be here till, next week and still not.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's more just a sort of to say that yes, I don't have the answer when it comes to the physical answers, but when I look at God, he also doesn't answer those questions for me. I know he does for others, but for me, it just seems incoherent.
Yeah, I agree. We've got some comments. Opie says existence requires something to occupy space for a period of time. I agree.
Absolutely.
That's basically what we just went over there. Well said. Josh says wants to know, but is come to terms with I don't know and the possibilities of what could exist outside this universe. Yeah, that's always an interesting one. For me, because I try and imagine the universe, and obviously it's so vast and it's so big, it doesn't all fit into my head. So is there an outside, or is it absolutely everything? Yeah, my mind boggles. Tom has made a very long comment, but I will read it out as best as I can. Apologies if I fumble along the way. My painkillers are really kicking in right now. He says, have you guys come across a book called The Universal One by Walter Russell? It deals with the mind-centered electromagnetic universe. The universe is a multiplicity of changing effects of but one unchanging cause. All things are universal. Nothing is which is not universal. Nothing is of itself alone. Man and mind and all creating things are universal. No man can say, I alone am I. There is but one universe, one mind, one force, one substance. When man knows this in measurable exactness, then will he have no limitations within those which are universal. I've not come across that book, no.
No, I haven't. But I'll
sounds
see if I
interesting,
can.
though.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get a copy from the university library.
Oh yeah, you're back on that now. Yeah, wicked. Yeah, I will definitely have a look into it. It sounds interesting. As Josh says, it sounds like Schopenhauer, and Opie says it sounds like sophistry. Yeah.
I'm always happy to read a differing view, though. You know.
Yeah, well, it makes things interesting. If you read the same thing over and over again, you just switch off to it, don't you? You don't take in any new information.
That's why I don't go in most atheist Facebook groups.
Oh God, yeah. Or most of the atheist versus theist ones, because it's always the same arguments going back and forth. And it's like, yeah, I did that for a couple of years. I don't know how I spent that long doing it. Yeah, but yeah, no. Thank you for that, Tom. It does sound very interesting. It does sound a little bit like how there is sort of like the thought that there is sort of one consciousness, and we're all different forms of this consciousness experiencing itself in different ways. And I can't remember where I first heard that, but that does sound what it's saying. Apparently, he was good friends with Tesla. Intriguing. Cool. So on to the next one then, yes?
Yeah.
If it will start.
Of the arguments for God's existence, is there one that to you seems more interesting than the rest? Is there one that for you actually does weigh in favor of theism? Which one? Most atheists I've met humbly...
Things aren't clicking and I say them.
Tramadol.
Yes. Sorry.
See, it even says it on screen, TR. It knows.
So, interesting. Are there arguments for a God's existence that I find more convincing than others? Not necessarily the Christian God. I don't necessarily find, say, the Kalam particularly convincing, but I do find that it does produce a logical argument for a first cause, whatever that first cause may be. But in general, I think that's why I've become an atheist over time myself, is the fact that the more I looked into arguments for various gods existing, the more I found that they weren't convincing to me, and the more I found more convincing arguments that they didn't exist. So it's actually quite hard for me to say, well, which ones do I find more convincing? And generally, it's the ones that go, well, there could have been something that started it all, that sort of thing. What about you, Dave?
I'm sort of partial to the argument from design.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily convince me, but I think there's something very intuitive about it, because when we look around, we look at us, we look at how things flow, one could mistake it for designed. So I think it's one of the more intuitive arguments.
But I mean, I can understand why people accept it. I just don't necessarily find that one for myself. I will say though, actually, there is something that for me, when I sit back and I start thinking about things, it's actually a fallacious thought. It's my own argument from incredulity, in the sense that I think about how we are on this giant ball, right? That's got a ball that's spinning round it, and we're spinning round this giant flaming ball that's hurtling through the fucking universe, and somehow it all works together. So I suppose it is a bit of like the argument from design. I just find the argument for design argues too much from a form of perfection, whereas I don't look at the universe and think it's perfect. I think it's almost like a 6-year-old shook some shit together and somehow it just worked.
Well, I think we're actually all sea monkeys in a far distant future. We're on some shelf in some small child's bedroom, and he taps on the glass every now and again.
Yeah, it could be right.
But yeah, the arguments from perfection don't necessarily work for me. But more sort of the arguments for, like you said, look at how in tune everything is, and it has an almost clockwork-like structure. You know, DNA has a sort of code-like structure to it. It can give off the illusion that it was created by a mind quite easily.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it is one of the things that does get me thinking about it, and it's one of the things that makes me sit back and go, I really don't know enough.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. So Josh mentions the contingency argument.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
Do you want to cover that one off briefly?
Most things are contingent upon the existence of something else, including the universe. It's contingent upon something that existed before it. And all those things must rely on some non-contingent original base, to put it in a simple and sloppy way. And God is, for the Christian, the non-contingent thing. He is the thing that's always existed.
Yeah. Again, we're back to the whole, if there is something that could have always existed, why does it have to be that thing?
Yeah.
Cool. Right, let's move on then.
Most atheists I've met humbly admit that they don't think they can have absolute certainty about much of anything. But what they want from the Christian is a demonstration that God exists or that Christianity is true. Well, when we offer the reasons to believe that we do have, those are typically deemed not good enough. So what sort of evidence, if any, would be enough to convince you? Do you know? And since it's often a conversation stopper, let's take experimental reproducibility off the table, since that's not even always necessary for science.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think this is a question that not many people have thought about. But for me, if all the clouds in the sky spelt out, I am God, and everything around me froze except me, I would lean towards that being proof of the existence of God. I know you could make the argument that perhaps it's just really advanced aliens doing it. And yes, it could count for a belief like that as well. But for me, I would also count something like that to be towards the existence of God. Or imagine if an animal just suddenly started appearing on the face of the earth and it couldn't be explained by evolution, and they appeared everywhere, and say they breathed without lungs, that kind of thing. I take that as evidence for God.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest thing, isn't it? Because as we've advanced as a civilization, we've realized that really advanced technology will seem like magic or miracles to earlier people. And I think I used to have an idea of what I would accept as evidence. And as a technology has evolved and I've learned more about technology, that has got smaller and smaller. If any of you out there who are watching want to say in the chat right now, we'll get to what you would accept yourself. I think that if someone could somehow appear to every single person in the world all at the same time and in their minds and before them and do things that just could not be explained by science in any way, shape, or form, do the impossible, then that would definitely lean me towards that path. But there'd still be the question of which God. And even if it was, right, well, it is the Christian God. Okay, so which version of the Bible? Which translation? Can you correct us for that? Why did all of these things in there that, I'd still have so many questions after that. I find this question really difficult, though, because I am at a point where I don't know what I would accept anymore. I used to know what I would accept, but I don't. However, if there is a God that is all-knowing and all-powerful, he would know what I would accept, and he would have the ability to give me what I would accept, even though I don't know myself. So I think that whatever this God did, he would know and he'd be able to do. And then if he wanted me to be a theist, or she wanted me to be theist, or they, or it, or whatever pronoun this particular deity prefers, they'd be able to do it and would do it, wouldn't they?
I would think so. But what if there is absolutely nothing that could convince you? Because you believe any advanced technology looks like divinity to a lower species.
Well, if the God was all powerful, couldn't he still convince me?
I don't know.
Depends on your definition of all powerful.
Yeah.
But
And all knowing.
Yeah.
Another thing that would convince me is, imagine if a book appeared in everybody's home tomorrow, written in a language that nobody had ever seen before, but everybody across the world, regardless of whichever language they speak, could read it.
That would be something pretty impossible, and yeah, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, something like that would convince me as well. Again, there's the whole alien technology thing, but I would count that as evidence towards the existence of a god.
Yeah, definitely. Tom says the rapture happening would definitely convince him.
Yeah, that would do.
Yeah.
Or dying and waking up in the medium place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Josh says the communication from a being which is inerrant and perfectly translated in a manner it can be understood by all, in which the knowledge is delivered perfectly to assist humankind to achieve its highest potential in the shortest period of time. That's similar to your go at it there with the book, isn't it, Dave, in a way? Just a little bit more...
more specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, both of those are pretty good. Yeah. Cool.
To what extent did social and moral issues start you down the path toward your atheism? That is to say, the typical Christian or religious views on sexuality, gender, rights, and acts and commands of God in the Old Testament. It seems that many deconversion stories online begin with, or at least include, LGBT issues, purity culture, or hell as instrumental in the deconversion process. It strikes me that what should matter most is the truth and not what we might prefer that the truth were. I honestly wonder how much those issues and ones like them motivate the deconversion rather than all this talk about evidence.
Yeah, I mean, that one's quite interesting. That didn't really play into part for me, the moral issues. I started questioning when I was quite young. For me, it was things that didn't make sense, and there were just seemed things that I would ask. I mean, I went to Christian schools. I was saying the Lord's Prayer every day. When I went to secondary school, especially when I was at boarding school, I had a Sunday service and all that. And religious studies in secondary school onwards were very focused on Christian theology rather than, like, my primary school. It was quite good. It looked at all different religions, but it became very focused in secondary school. And I would speak to the vicar or the priest or whoever I was speaking to at the time, and they couldn't answer my questions, or if they did, they'd answer it in such a way it would raise more questions and more questions and more questions. And the deeper I dug into things, the more there was left unanswered, and the more it got to a point where people were just like, oh, God just did it, and it became a God of the gaps argument. It was, we don't know, therefore God. And that is what actually inspired me down the path. It wasn't originally due to any moral issues. That came after it. And then I was like, so why would a God do this sort of thing? If it's a loving God, why would he do that? If it's a knowing God, why would he do that? Etc.
That makes sense. I haven't really got an answer for this one because I've never deconverted.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, interesting. Josh says he has an exact incident when he started his atheism. It was the problem of evil and an experience he had in the emergency department. Interesting. Very interesting. If you want to elaborate on that one, Josh, please do. Although we're probably going to have to move on now because we've answered that one as much as we can. Adam's going. Have yourself a good one, Adam.
Good night, Opie. Have a great night. Yeah, good night.
So Tom also says it's not the morality he necessarily takes issue with, it's the contradictions in the Holy Book. And yeah, I mean that's similar to where I'm at. That's what started me down with it. There are definite issues with the morality. Of course, you could argue that if there is an all-perfect God, then actually there's no issues with the morality. It's just issues with ourselves. So yeah, I do think there are issues, morally speaking, when you understand what morality is. But yeah, I'm with you, Tom. It was for me at least those issues. How you doing, Josh? You're looking naked. I can't hear you. You're not coming through, Josh.
If he's naked, are we sure we want him to be coming through?
I mean, to be honest, we could put a Patreon video up of him getting naked.
Oh, there we go.
You're not coming through, man.
I'm not.
I think
it's really patchy.
Yeah, there's a lot of interference. I can't really hear
now?
you. A little bit better.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was working out.
Ah, cool. How you doing though?
So, good. I figured you asked, so I figured I'd just jump on real quick and give you my story.
Yeah, wicked.
Awesome.
So, I'm a pharmacist in the emergency department, so I see some pretty crazy shit. And one day it's a pretty sad story, obviously, if it turned me completely off of my religion in like within 24 hours. But we had a 3-month-old baby come in who was in the middle of dying. So we're doing a code blue on him and didn't make it after us doing about 45 minutes to an hour of cardiac life support on him. And it was really actually the story. So the mom was at work and nobody could get a hold of her in time, and she didn't make it to the emergency department to be there for the resuscitative events, which usually helps parents get separation when this happens and come to terms with it. So she showed up there after, and it come to find out it was her first day back to work, and it was the child's first day at daycare. So that struck me as I was like, why? There's like so many other options and so many other ways that this could have happened. Just why? And I remember that night I went to my computer and I typed in it like things like, what is God and is there a God? And 5 years later, I'm here.
I mean, that's an awful, heartbreaking story, and I mean, God, I can't believe being the parents in that situation, or yourself. I mean, that must have been absolutely heartbreaking for you. Yeah.
Especially as a father.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that I definitely think the problem of evil is it's got to be like one of the biggest reasons why. Maybe not that people actually start to call themselves an atheist, but end up going down that road.
Yeah, to be honest, I hear from a lot of other atheists that the problem of evil is one of the things that convinces them that God doesn't exist, or at least the evidential problem of evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
All right, well, loving the show.
No worries.
Thank you
easy,
for popping
Josh.
on, dude.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll let you guys get back to it. I'll be listening while I finish my workout.
Nice one. Take it
Catch you
easy.
later. I mean, if I'd known
Later,
he was
guys.
working out, I'd have had a mix and he could have joined in. Yeah. That's awful. Yeah, the problem of evil. That's one of those conversations I don't actually like getting in with this because it becomes awfully circular as you go round and round and round. But yeah, I can understand why that is one of the things that would at least start people down that path. And
Yeah.
blimey, as Tom says, what a harrowing experience to have.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure I could cope with something like that.
No. I mean, yeah, I'm a little bit stunned right now. Probably why I'm laughing, because that seems to be how I deal
British
with
way.
tragedy. But please don't take the fact that I'm laughing as me being insensitive. It's
how
quite
us
the
Brits
opposite.
deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next question.
Can you name the last 3 academic books you read by theists on the subject? How long ago did you read them? Or is most of your understanding of apologetics and atheism from non-scholarly internet sources, pop-level books, and, let's face it, YouTube videos? And be honest with yourself about this. Anyone can Google up a list of books and paste them in the comments section. But I want to know, are you getting the best from the other side?
I mean, this is a very, very, very fair question. And to be honest, the last time I read theistic stuff was probably in my teenage years. And generally it was about a variety of different religions, and it was me being very interested in a lot of pagan mythology. So it's not the sort of books that he was talking about. It's not necessarily as academic he's speaking about. I do read different papers here and there when either someone sends me a link or I get interested in a particular topic, and then whilst I'm looking up this topic there's something I don't understand, and then I have to look at this bit, and I end up down that rabbit hole that I'm sure many of you have been down, trying to understand this one thing, and you've ended up being confused by a million. But yeah, if I'm honest, it's, yeah, as I said, since I was a teenager, I haven't read any decent theistic material, at least in the form of a book. There have been the odd papers here and there, but in general, no, I haven't. What about you, Dave? I know you have. You've probably read a lot of Swinburne and stuff like that, haven't you?
Yeah, Swinburne, Plantinga. I read Reasonable Faith. I've read things like the Summa Theologica, William James' Will to Believe. But it was like a long time ago when I was still doing my undergrad, 6 years ago? I do plan on revisiting, but I've been a bit preoccupied with other books and papers and stuff since then.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough time in the day to read all the stuff that you want to. And generally, I find when I'm reading something, I don't know if you have the same problem, Dave, but it opens up that rabbit hole I was speaking of, where I need to learn this, and then I'm reading this bit, and it sends me over here, and before I can get to the end of this bit, I go over here and read this, and all of a sudden I'm just like, I don't have the time. I want to read this, but to read this, I've got to read this in the way.
Yeah, I treat a reference section like a recommended reading list. But yeah, I do. I generally try to read stuff, but like I said, I've mostly been focused on the master's degree and other things. So I hope to catch up on a few and go over a few others. But at the moment, I'm reading stuff that I didn't get a chance to read.
Yeah.
That I'm interested in.
Yeah. And to be honest, I think it would be one of the things that I'd really like to do for episodes in the future, if the pair of us could read the same book and try and get through to it and sort of do a book review, do what we found convincing in it, found, any positive arguments, any negative bits to it. It'd be really good, and it wouldn't just be theology, all aspects of philosophy, especially opinions that we tend not to agree with, so we can provide a better critique. Because if we read stuff that we already agree with, we're just going to go, well, yeah, read it, it's what we think. I'd much rather read something that I don't agree with and go, well, actually, there were these parts in here that had me really stuck on them for a couple of days, going over and over in my mind, and I found those arguments quite convincing, and it almost pulled me that way thinking about it. But yeah, when we have the time.
Well, paper collection, journal article collection.
Yeah, I suppose we should start with those. Maybe papers rather than full books. But yeah, I'd be well up for that. Josh says he hasn't read any. He's more interested in philosophy in general rather than theology. But you do get a lot of God content through that in itself. Tom says that he can't really answer that question because his belief is somewhere between science, philosophy, and Buddhism.
Understandable.
Yeah, that's
not
fair.
Everybody is interested in the God of classical theism or the God of Christianity or the God of Islam.
No, and I think sometimes when you've reached the point where you've gone, there's so many logical inconsistencies with this particular belief, with this particular deity, etc. You go, I really can't be bothered to revisit this. Perhaps you should, but then it would be better if someone went, have you heard this argument? Okay, if you haven't heard this argument, read pages, 70 through 75 from this book or this particular paper, and it might give you a new perspective on the whole problem. Yeah, and I think that'd probably be a better way to do it, because I think when you've got to, especially the typical omnigod, the Abrahamic deity, I think that is one that has more issues than other deities. So when you've got to the point where you're like, yeah, I believe that one doesn't exist, it's a lot harder to go, oh yeah, I'm going to spend 40 quid on this book of stuff that I don't believe.
Yeah, that's it. What we're interested in, what we believe, is what drives us to learn new things, as I've explained on other streams. So if you're not particularly interested in learning about the Christian God, you're not going to be going out doing all the research. And I think one of the things that kind of Christians and other atheists will get stuck on is that they think their beliefs are absolutely true. And therefore, anybody who doesn't believe them just hasn't looked into it enough.
Yeah. Which is a bit flawed thinking in and of itself.
Yeah.
So-
Muslims are one of the worst for that, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially the more dogmatic, although you could say that for the more fundamentalist Christians as well.
Yeah.
Let's finish with a pretty common one. If you found out today to your satisfaction that Christianity were true, would you accept God's authority, repent of your sins, and trust Jesus as your king?
I think that was probably the worst question of them all.
Yeah. So
I would accept that he's real, but I wouldn't worship him or accept Jesus as my savior and whatnot, because...
Well, it depends. If they managed to give me satisfactory answers for all the logical inconsistencies and everything, then perhaps, if I'm honest, like if they could say, well, no, these parts of the Bible were actually false, these bits were put in by people to try and control people, maybe. But if you're talking about if I found out that the run-of-the-mill general belief that the average Christian has in Christianity, if that is the one that is proved to be true, and there's no explanation for all the things that I find immoral within it, okay, I may believe this God exists, but I would not worship it. There is too much stuff in there that I just disagree with.
Same. That's why I wouldn't worship him, because it still wouldn't change my mind about some of the more awful things, and some of the more awful things that Christians have done, some of the more sort of hateful beliefs. I know not all Christians have them, but many of them derive them from the Bible. And God's done nothing to sort of change the mind of those who might be misrepresenting him. So I don't know. My argument, what if you're wrong, on the answers and reasons side, that basically sums up all my reasons for why I wouldn't worship God, even if I found out he was real.
Yeah. So I think we're in agreement. If we're speaking of the standard run-of-the-mill Christianity, we might accept that God, and
You are
believe it
dyslexic.
exists, but we wouldn't necessarily worship it.
Yeah.
And only if we could actually have a commune with this deity and find out all the issues, and actually find out that a lot of it's bullshit, and get the correct set of beliefs and actual morality and things that we agreed with, then, well, maybe, but not with how Christianity stands for the average person.
Same with Islam,
Yeah.
And a question for somebody like that, or a question for Christians who ask something like that. Put aside all this idea that you cannot be wrong about Christianity and that Christianity is the ultimate truth. Put all that aside for a moment. What would happen if you found out that Islam was actually the real religion? Would you drop Christianity and become a Muslim?
And then go one further to both Christians and Muslims. What if you found out Hinduism was the real religion? And just go through those. Like, could you actually find that you would worship these gods just because you found out that they were definitely true, even though there's some things that do not tie in with your moral compass?
Yeah.
Yeah, as Josh says, it would have to be worth worshipping to convince you to worship.
See, I think one of the things is inherent within the arguments for gods like the Christian God is the argument that everything that comes from him is good. Therefore, if he commands something, it must be good. He must have good reasons for commanding it, blah, 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 blah. I can't put myself in that mindset.
No, and one of the things that came from God was evil, therefore evil is good.
Well, if it's all part of a divine plan.
Yeah, I can go through all the excuses. I've heard them
Yeah.
all, but it's one of those things.
Oh, no, I'm agreeing with you. If it's all part of a divine plan where everything works up to the rapture, and it's about teaching people moral lessons, then there is no evil. There is no bad.
But yeah, I mean, that's our Friday night stream. 10 questions for atheists. That's
It's a good thing it wasn't 20.
Yeah, yes, that's Trinity Radio with Braxton Hunter. I mean, he is one of the more enjoyable theists to watch because he's not as combative as you would find some.
Yeah, I've also seen him defending atheists and having a go at Christians who strawman atheism and stuff like that. So, as far as I can see, he does try to be genuine.
Yeah, he's definitely someone worth having a watch of. You can find him over on YouTube, and I will put a link once I publish this one to our playlist in response. And you never know, he might actually respond to us as well. But hopefully you found tonight informative, and maybe he will too. Are there any questions or anything else that anyone out there would like to ask or have us do in the future? Obviously, if you're watching this on the rerun, feel free to put it in the comments or catch us on Twitter at Answers in Reason, or Facebook, facebook.com/Answers in Reason, I think, or just go to the website answersinreason.com or answers-in-reason.com. Yeah.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. And thank you, Tom and Josh. And I know Opie's gone already, but thank you to Opie in case he catches the rerun.
Yeah, and also the rest of you that have also been watching on the live. Shirts off show. He'd like a shirts off show. I mean, let me lose my baby belly.
I've got bigger boobs than most women, so you don't want to see me topless.
But yeah. That could be quite a fun night. I mean, maybe we should just get completely mashed one night. Yes, Tom, thank you for joining in and all your comments and everything. It's great to have interaction. Nice you can finally check us out as well. We do sometimes have a mix beforehand. You know me well enough to know that I'm a shit DJ, but it can still be fun having a bit of a mix and hear me stack pretty much every single one. I didn't tonight because my back's hurting and I couldn't be bothered to stand up.
I can relate to the can't be bothered to stand up part. Hence the reason for the big boobs.
Yeah. And honestly, if any of you have a topic as well that you'd like to discuss with us, you'd like to come on, we're up for having guests on board. We quite enjoy a different type of discussion. I mean, Tom, you and yourself, you said you're somewhere between science, philosophy, and Buddhism. That sounds like a really interesting worldview. If you just want to come along and explain that to us, I mean, that could be really interesting. You might find Dave asking you so many questions that your brain implodes, but that can be good.
Might imploded a long time
for
ago.
the soul too.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. I'm Joe.
I'm Plato.
And you've been listening to the SciPhi Show by Fresh Air.
Good night, all.
Night all.